for you at the end. So it does not have all the slides, but it does have key points and key copy here. Take notes if you like, as you like. That's probably a good thing because you'll see things that are not in that along the way. So let's just take a journey. So let's not work. This is the Star Gauge. It's by the poet Su Hui, who was a poet and palindromist from the 4th century in China, a woman who may actually have been a person or may have been a mythic figure.
Do you want me to click slides for you?
No, that's all right. 841 characters. Man, nothing is working here. You read it forward, backward, horizontally, vertically, diagonally. (2,848) poems in one work. They're all, according to the myth of Su Hui, poems to her husband, who left with a concubine. And they were all poems that were to convince him to come back. And she was such a fantastic poet that he did come back. That's the story. So there it is, 4th century. He wrote no more and drank himself to death. No more he wrote and drank himself to death. Death to himself he wrote and drank no more. To death he drank himself and wrote no more. He wrote himself and no more drank to death. He drank and wrote himself to death, no more. No more he drank and wrote to himself, death. No, death wrote. He drank himself to more and he wrote more and drank himself to death. No. No death drank he and wrote himself to no. Himself he wrote and no more drank to death. He wrote more to himself and death. No, drank. And so on. There are actually maybe about 50 or 60 variations on this. This is a little bit of an indication of how well monosyllables and pentameter can be manipulated, but it illustrates very briefly some of the things I want to try to illustrate today. At present, there are approximately 6,000 languages in the world. Approximately 200 of them are written. Yeah. As a medium for art, writing's essential property or method. By the way, what I'm about to say here comes from trying to think through a question I ask myself about every art medium. What is the essential function that it serves? What is the essential thing that it does, that only it does, that if it were usurped or combined with something else or replaced with another art form would be lost? Because they're not, the book is not the movie, for example. Right? Okay. As a medium for art, writing's essential property or method is words arranged into strings, successions, chains, concatenations. Writing's fundamental aesthetic power And its fundamental source of pleasure derives from one thing: accumulation. Phrases and clauses into sentences, into paragraphs, and so on. And the variety of stops, rests, spaces, breaches between them. That's really what we're all trying to do here. It's not about anything other than that. Without accumulations of words and their associated spaces, no rhythm can establish itself. No dream through signification can emerge. The literary artist invites a reader to traverse such linear accumulations, partake, thank you, hello, can you? Partake of the drama of their investigation. I'll be shouting now. Partake of their drama, their investigations and arrangement, and their sequential appearance in time, and thereby have an experience. That's essentially what we do. My country, right or wrong. My club, my family, my religion, my sex. These are all ways of fleeing from the fact that we are all naked, hungry, mortal, and dignified. That's a sentence from Martha Nussbaum from a book review. The New Republic. I've lined it out just so you can see the component parts. Without syntax, there is no lasting emotion. Immortality is the creation of grammarians. Tell that to your English teachers. Fernando Pessoa. The Book of Disquiet, which was, Pessoa died in 1935. The book was probably written before that. It was not published until 1982. Great book. I recommend it to you. Sentences must be understood to contain all sorts of unused syntactical space, says William Gass in a very interesting book called Life Sentences, which I recommend to you. Oh, curiosity killed the cat, or a cat, or that cat, or our cat, my cat. Curiosity probably killed the cat, probably. It would seem that curiosity killed the cat, one hopes. It would seem that curiosity, that renowned and prideful attribute, killed the cat. Whether or not you can bear the shock of recognition and the physical evidence of contingency's long threat to desire, do not deny, avert, pretty up, or philosophize the gist. Curiosity spurred the cat, fed it, really, toyed with it as time beat within its breast, and yes, if not caused it to be killed, encouraged its doom. So we have a lot of options every time we write a sentence, every sentence. And it's important for us to be aware of that. Grammatical structures are superficial. They want and need to be as evident as gravy spills because countless superficial people must use them. Those are not us, by the way. And because common speech loves vagueness and ambiguity. Layers of reality, degrees of uncertainty, ranges of attitude, levels of society, depth of contextual connection, modulations of tone, the ramifications and complexities of concept, and above all, the vocabulary of the denoted world must be taken into account, managed, made the best of. That's our MFA right there, right? All that we got to do, all the time, those things. This is a little bit of an extrapolation, I suppose, on what Jennifer Egan was talking about the other day when she was talking about the history that's in arranging sentences and in words. But there it is. Those are all parts of what we're doing. This is William Gass as well. Other considerations of aesthetic performance too. These are on your list, so you don't have to copy these. The placement of the main, these are may seem humble, but they're world shifting. The placement of the main verb and supporting actions in your sentences. How soon in the sentence does the main action occur? And is the main verb the main dramatic content of the sentence? You notice that, remember, our cat, with many other things happening before it actually was killed, right? How many episodes of arrangement? How many episodes of arrangement occur in the sentence? You poets who write a 20-line poem that has 4 sentences in it know that each of those phrases, each adjective is a kind of episode, right? So how many episodes of arrangement occur in the sentence? What is the duration of each of those episodes? We're going to look at some examples here in a minute. And the relation of each of those to those that have come before and those about to come, right? No phrase is an island, no sentence is an island, no paragraph is an island, right? Placement of the main verb and supporting actions, right? How anticlimactic is the sentence structure? Or how periodic? One of the things that's fundamental about sentences is that they occur in time. They do have a dramatic action. Syntactical suspensions and parentheticals. Think again about our extended cat sentence. Elaborations of claims. Employment of scoring devices like semicolons and dashes and colons and all kinds of things like that. Designs of extended figuration, extended metaphors, conceits, if any. A density of modification. Are you a writer that uses a lot of adjectives and adverbs or not? Registers of diction. Rhythm and sound. Repetitions and variations. One of the things that we all hope to do, I think, this sounds like a lot of things to pay attention to all at once, right? Is to do what Goethe said. You know, a poet should know all philosophy and forget it into his poems. And Neruda, playing off Goethe, said a poet should know all form and forget it into his poems. So you want to get so that becomes like second nature to you. And what's called the 2-3-1 or Rose for Emily effect. 2-3-1. When you write a sentence or a paragraph, the beginning of the paragraph or sentence gets the second greatest emphasis or attention. The least attention tends to be in the middle, and of course, because the ending is the ending, right? It gets a lot of attention. The Rose for Emily effect. I mean, the story. That story, the Faulkner story, Rose for Emily. It's the story is not told in the sequence it happens. It's told in the shape of the most dramatic revelation. The very final revelation is that iron gray lock of hair on the pillow. So you know Emily has been sleeping next to that, the skeleton of her murdered lover. Ooh. And that's how you're supposed to be at the end. Ooh. But it happens early. It happened before the story even started. This trip, which has opened me up to the uselessness of my own existence, has also helped me see that my own face has been completed for years and must now disintegrate with time. That's Moritz Thompson from the Sadist Pleasure. Lamp's going to be talking about sentences tomorrow too, so we seem to be all drinking from the same well. I think that's a good sentence. But you can see its component parts there lined out. I am overrun, jungled in my bed. I am infested with a menagerie of desires. My heart is eaten by a dove. A cat scrambles my sex. Hounds in my head obey a whipmaster who cries nothing but havoc as the hours test my endurance with an accumulation of tortures. We have the parallelism those early phrases, and then a dramatic point at the sort of the clubhouse turn, the longer section, and then the sentence ends and comes to rest, right? The Accumulation of Tortures. That's by Elizabeth Smart, from a terrific book, if you don't know it, by Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept, which is kind of a novella-length fiction or nonfiction, but it's definitely an aria. It's about a love affair. In the aesthetically interesting sentence, which is the only kind that we're really interested in writing here, correct? In any case, every materiality of language is employed. Every materiality is employed to build a body for the meaning that will realize the union of thought and thing that Paradise apparently forgot to promise us. He's both telling us what a sentence is and also why we need to have sentences do this, right? It's to somehow rescue that union of thought and thing. And give consciousness the solid presence it constantly yearns for and will never quite realize. This is a variation on immortality in the grammarians. But that's what we're doing. That's the ultimate gift. Style in the broadest sense, then, encompassing everything from rhythm to word choice, is really consciousness in action. It's the closest thing we can get to it outside of our own experience of our own consciousness, right? And that's why when you read, you, as Louise Glick says, you release a companion spirit into the world, right? That voice, you're not alone in time. That's from Alan Shapiro, a wonderful book, In Praise of the Impure. He's a good poet, by the way. Frost, very famous and very, very useful observation. A dramatic necessity goes deep into the nature of a sentence. Sentences are not different enough, he says. I don't know about that. To hold the attention unless they are dramatic. No ingenuity of varying structure will do. All that can save them is the speaking tone of voice, somehow entangled in the words. Now that's Frost's personal anthem. And fastened to the page for the ear of the imagination. That's all that can save poetry from sing-song and all that can save prose from itself. But I want us to be encouraged to think about every sentence, even if it is a sentence that is an expository sentence, as a dramatic act. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has episodes. It has moments of anticlimax. It has reversals. It has any number of dramatic effects. And the longer it is, the more it's going to have those. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. We know this famous paragraph from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which is just a very short piece of writing. But look at all the architecture. We've got these parallelisms, right? That continue to build, because the paragraph is built to have a huge dramatic effect at the end, and has multiple effects to achieve that end. We've got that cascade, of the people, by the people, for the people. In your first year writing class, they would say, that's redundant, don't do that. It should be government of, by, and for the people, right? Soulwise, these are the times that try men, instead of these are the times that try men's souls. And notice the rhythm, shall not perish from the earth. And it comes, 2, 3, 1, it comes at the end. We hear that beat, right? So poetry is there. Increased devotion, the last full measure of devotion. Of course, the blank of blank, right, is one of the great little figuration machines, right? The last full measure of devotion, the bones of silence, fill in the blank of blank, right? That's a good one, that last full measure of devotion, rather than death. Sentences are not emotional, but paragraphs are, says Gertrude Stein. The difference between a short story and a paragraph, she says there is none. It's an interesting provocation. But if you think about that, as you're writing your stories and your essays and so on, each of them does have its own narrative development. Think of the rhetorical modes of paragraph development: classification, process, analysis, comparison, contrast, those kinds of rhetorical structures. Those modes of development, they're all kind of forms of narrative, right? If I'm giving you a process, I'm telling you how something happened. If I'm doing comparison, contrast, and I start to compare, you know I'm going to contrast, right? When you say there are 3 kinds of guys, we already have a structure that's hearkening, right? A tripartite structure of some sort. Are we going to fulfill that structure? Are we going to subvert it in interesting ways and then fulfill it, right? When we're talking to people, we could do it any other way, but when we're writing, we need to think about that. Does it become a shaggy dog story or not? For those awaiting death as we were, passive and apathetic, on the verge of collapse, ready to hit bottom, it takes only one flash of light in the darkness, one lucky break, and suddenly you rise up again and return to the living. What you leave behind, however, is an empty territory that you cannot even describe. It has no points of reference or shape or signposts. And its existence, like the sound barrier, is something you feel only once you have approached it. One step out of that emptiness, and it disappears. No one, however, who has entered this emptiness can ever be the same person he was before. Something remains. A psychological scar, hardened, gangrened flesh, a fact, finally more apparent to others than to himself. That something has burned out, that something is missing. You pay for every meeting with death. Now there's a piece of engineering, right? Aside from what it says, how it says it. Even with a few phrases in there that are not particularly, sensationally inventive, that are almost verging on the level of cliche. But the overall structure, notice the part of the reason I wanted it to appear phrase by phrase by phrase to you is so that you can see its dramatic effect as you read it. And of course, the crushing last sentence, right? It's not the first sentence in the paragraph, right? The very careful choice of, come on, darling, don't do this, there we go, of the sound barrier, right? That simile in the middle of the sentence, right? For those of us waiting death, this is what we were, right? And then it goes forward beyond that moment, right? So there, how many different actual actions are in the sentence? There are different sentence structures, but also actions, all about this one thing. This is by Richard Kapusinski from a book called The Soccer War. He's a great writer. Was a great writer. He's a great writer. His writing's still good. He's no longer with us, but his writing's good. For whom are you writing, David asked me. For the jewels and tiny serpents hidden in such names as you, I thought. And so he set me pondering about the notion of nomenclature inside these quirky little tales, brittle homes to put upon the mollusk of a name. But surely it was preferable to pick up an empty shell, a structure bleached with the promise that it was once a home. Come on. I cannot help it, David, if my names sound hollow to you. Residences that you must condemn. To me, they are the words most shaped like beds. The metaphor continues, right? And I am glad to find them empty, attendant upon my rest, on my rest. I have always liked to see a vacant space intact, a room disinterested in seeming finished, which surely shows the influence of growing up in houses built around courtyards. There's another leap. Designed in a world where people pray in mosques. I still miss it. How short, right? After all that, bang, I still miss it. The necessity of openness that puts a courtyard in the middle of a house and makes rooms curl around it. Nice verb, curl. So that each bedroom is but a door away from the seclusion of the sky. In summer, too, we slept beneath the stars. Another second short sentence that turns it. Curious sensation. Use of the colon. To lie on a rope bed and watch the sky. Until sleep comes as confirmation of the magnificence, irrelevance of beauty. Blank of blank. Right? That's Sarah Suleri from Meatless Days. A very elaborate style, but completely controlled. The more elaborate the style is, the more you got to control it. The more reckless sounding your style, the more you got to control it. The more high velocity, the more you've got to control it, but not be seen controlling it. How much of this particular paragraph is built out of the metaphor? Extending that metaphor, those metaphors of the shell and then the home, and also the varieties of circling that are in it, right? And yet it pushes it on forward. And the use of David, the direct address. Ours is a planet sown with beings, period. Our generations overlap like shingles. Period. We don't fall in rows like hay, but we fall. Period. Once we get here, we spend forever on the globe. Most of it tucked under. That's the more elaborate sentence, right? But still short, blunt phrases. While we breathe, we open time like a path in the grass. We open time as a boat's stem slits the crest of the present. That's Annie Dillard, of course, master of short sentences that are hugely dense and very quick, but and are like lines of poems, right? But making each of these is making an argument. We are sown with beings, right? The great unnumbered dead. What had periods to do with it? Gertrude Stein says. Inevitably, no matter how completely I have had writing to go on, I had to have writing go on, physically, one had to again and again stop sometime. Right? It isn't just where you start, it's where you stop, right? And if one has had to again and again stop sometime, then periods had to exist somewhere. Besides, I had always liked the look of periods. And I like what they did. Sometimes, stopping sometime did not really keep one from going on. It was nothing that interfered. It was only something that happened. And as it happened as a perfectly natural happening, I did believe in periods. And I used them. I never really stopped using them. You can see it raining darkly and fiercely far over there at the horizon across the scorched sawgrass. The sky will be a boiling panorama of high and low cloud shapes, cumulus, stratocumulus, altocumulus, dazzling and blue and dun. Sometimes far up, far away, between all that panoply, there will be a glimpse of outer space as green as ice. Then the lion-colored light shuts down as the rain does, or the clouds fill with their steely haze every outline of the visible world, and water falls solid in sheets, in cascades. When the clouds lift, the long, straight, rainy lines blow and curve from the sagging underbelly of the sky in steely wires or long trailing veils of wet that glitter in some sudden shift of light from the forgotten sun. Thunderstorms roll and reverberate over the surface, and lightning marbles the clouds as storms seem to come together from every direction, while the greenish and grayish world blinks with acid radiance. The lake may be blotted out by white falling water that sings with a rising note as the surface brims and is beaten. The curtains of rain, the rain fogs, move off or hang and sway in a dirty, gray half-light as the descending water smacks on the pitted and broken waves. The world is all water, is drowned in water, chill and pale and clean. It's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the Everglades River of Grass from 1946. If you don't know her, she's one of the people who has actually pretty much single-handedly saved the Everglades. She just died a few years ago. Yeah, she was 104, I think, when she died. But she was defending the Everglades back in the 40s. But that's a rainstorm. It rained, right? But look at the many different kinds of knowledge, right there. Jane Hirschfield in Nine Gates says great poems always hold more than one kind of knowledge. Those paragraphs hold more than one kind of knowledge. Sensory, perceptual, visual, auditory, and varieties of each, not just one of each, right? And there's all kinds of invention. Today in the workshop we were talking about the problem of cliché, and one of the problems of cliché is that it's a forsaken opportunity for invention. You know, every time you get an opportunity to use an adjective, that's an opportunity to innovate. That's an opportunity to create a perception. If you have brutal murder, that's an off-the-shelf collection of adjective and noun. Sweet murder at least causes the reader to stop. And maybe a new thought, maybe a new experience, maybe a new perception has been offered. Look at how many are offered in passing. You know, the space is green as ice. The acid radiance. And this is before acid rain, right? Though she's kind of on acid as she's writing that. Right? The very careful use of monosyllabic concatenations, chill and pale and clean, right? Not chilly, chill and pale and clean, right? Wink and blink and a nod, right? So a lot going on there. A rising note on the surface brims and is beaten. There's a nice moment with a verb of being. So you don't always have to have an action verb to make poetry. Cumulus, stratocumulus, altocumulus, dazzling in blue and dun. There's that outer space. How about that lion-colored light? Yes. Wow! Yeah, that's just in passing. The clouds fill with their steely haze in sheets and cascades. She sometimes just uses 2 instead of 3 in a row, right? And how about the forgotten sun? Lightning marbles the clouds. There's the acid radiance. Right? The world is all water. Is drowned in water. 2 verbs of being. Right? So there you go. Nicely done. But the narrative shape of the sentence is not just a nice touch or a final flourish. It inscribes the verbal journey that meaning also makes. These two travel together in the same coach. Although the words are up top driving the horses, while the referents are sitting in the stage with hankies, held daintily to their noses against the persistent dust. Masterful use of metaphor. You know, extended metaphors like that drive the drama of the sentence. All he's doing is talking about the relationship of words and their reference and how they, but suddenly we have a picture for it. If you haven't grasped that William Gass is a fabulous stylist, he is. Read everything you can by him. He's great. Alas, I know he is the hermaphrodite whose love looks up through the apple tree with a golden, indeterminate face. While I drive along the road in the evening, talking as impersonally as a radio discussion, he tells me, a boy with green eyes and long lashes, whom I had never seen before, took me into the back of a print shop and made love to me. And for 2 weeks, I went around remembering the numbers on conductors' hats. One should love beings, whatever they are, I reply, but withdraw into the dark with my obstreperous shape of shame, offended by my own flesh, which cannot metamorphose into a print shop boy with armpits like chalices. His foreshortened face appears in profile in the car window like an irregular graph of my doom. How about that for a leap? Merciless as a mathematician. That's nice, huh? Leering accompaniment to all my good resolves. There is no medicinal to be obtained from the dry herbs of any natural hill. For when I tread those upward paths, the lowest vines conspire to abet my plot, and the poison oak thrusts its insinuation under my foot. She's troubled. This is Elizabeth Smart too. Those chalices are pretty fantastic, right? Right? I mean, to have come up with that, just unbelievable. Yeah. The whole thing is written at that level. Yeah. One more example of mastery of short sentences. When I got out of the shower, the phone rang. It was the hospital. They told me to come back. I dressed quickly, ran out, found a taxi. As I entered the hospital, I was stopped at the desk. There had been a phone call from my brother. A nurse told me to return the call before going to Sylvia's room. She insisted. I phoned. My brother answered. He said Sylvia had died. The nurse waited outside the phone booth. She told me to go now to Sylvia's room, collect her things. My feet walked to her room. I didn't remember what things I was supposed to collect. It was a clean, white, empty bed. I saw emptiness. I left the hospital with nothing at all. Leonard Michaels from Shuffle. She insisted, right? I phoned. My brother answered. So, hugely engineered, hugely affecting. Now, of course, part of it is the arrangement of the details, but look at how he's given it to us, telegraphing it. Often with great writers, it is instructive to stop at the point in the sentence or in the metaphor or in a perception where the ordinary writer might have come to a halt. That's James Wood, a great, interesting book called The Nearest Thing to Light. And at that point, I'm going to stop and entertain any questions that you might have. I probably can't answer them, but I'll try, and we can have a discussion if that's of help. But I think that's worth thinking about, right? Have I done enough, right? Or not enough? So there we go. Questions? I'll offer one more point here, and that is, you know, we underestimate how much we are not native speakers of literary language. That no one really is a native to that linguistic realm. Literature, literary writing, and literary language, we're colonists all there. We have to come to learn how to do that, even in our so-called native language. And that's something that gets overlooked, I think. We just assume there's a lot of talk about not being a native or being colonized or co-opted through other languages. And all that's very interesting and true. But there is also what we're just trying to do in here, which is we are trying to enter into a place that really is not native to us. We have to become native, kind of native twice. We learn the language and then we have to learn this language. Because that's all very different than the way we deal with language and even the way we write. And the other fundamental fact about writing is that among the art forms, it's very material, its very substance is used by everybody else for all kinds of other things. People don't go out and dance their grocery lists, right? They don't they don't Twitter out, some musical piece. They don't, and all those other uses are there. And we're trying to find some way to make that language that embodies a voice that will perhaps have some grasp on immortality, or at least hold that voice into the future so that those in the future are not quite so alone, or just alone in the present. So questions, comments, or anything? Yeah?
Is that why your book is in an unusual format?
Say that again?
Is that why your book is in such an unusual format, the one over in the bookstore?
I don't know which one's in the bookstore. Oh, why is that like that? That's like that because the lines were pretty long. And the publisher said, this book's wider than it is tall. That's what it amounts to. It's a poetry book. And some of the lines are traditional lines, lengths, they're metered, but some of them are prose-like. And so he said, let's let the book breathe on the page. And so that's partly a visual more than it is an auditory thing or a grammatical thing. Other comments? Other questions? Now, what I've just shown you is terribly superficial, right? It's just an illustration, and I'm really just trying to jar you toward thinking about those things, about exploring each of those layers, because there are innumerable ways that you can do it. I think we can also see that there's plenty of poetry in prose. There's such a thing as prose, and there's such a thing as verse. Verse indicates that poetry is hoped for. But it doesn't mean that there's going to be any poetry there, right? Anything else? You're in the Easter. Yes, yeah.
So I have a question. So we saw a lot of different styles of engineering. You're saying the word engineering a lot. Do you have any advice towards aligning the engineering of a piece when you're in the revision process? Because you might have a different thought or a different phrase might affect the actual mechanics of your writing, but you ideally, in most pieces, want to make sure that everything's aligned, and it's just mainly your vocabulary that's invoking different tones. So any tips for revision to sort of align the piece?
Well, I think that Jennifer Egan was, first off, she was tremendously lucid. I found her very, very insightful and helpful. But one of the things that I think she illustrates over and over again is that writing is many different jobs. And we all know it's a process, and we don't do, but she really is focused in on particular kinds of jobs. So when you say revision, that's really not one thing. There may be many different layers of revision. Maybe I'm just going to go back and look at all the nouns and all the verbs in this, But you wouldn't do that at the beginning. What was so important about what she said was how she went from this macro writing that was rigorous in its daily discipline. I'm going to do 5 to 7 pages every day. I'm not even going to read what I wrote yesterday. I'm going to just go on, and I'm going to do that for a year and a half until I've got an overall manuscript. I don't have a manuscript that I can show anybody, really, maybe a friend, that'd be it. So then I type it up, and then I put together that 85-page outline with check boxes and things I'm going to start working on. I'm actually going to look at that manuscript and start bringing that the story of that manuscript, because I'm trying to write a novel, right? I'm going to try to bring that story out. We're still not to that engineering phase at all, right? At least according to the Egan method. So, but there's no pressure to do that. That's what's important. It relieves you of a whole lot of duties. You just got a certain kind of duty. And you can just say, that's not my job right now. This is what I'm trying to do. And focus on that. I think a lot of writers find the final revising of work to be a great joy because the bones have been found, the bones have been arranged, the story is there, and now we're working on those fine revisions. Specific tips, I don't really have any specific tips other than, I read everything aloud. When I start writing the next day, I read the previous 3 or 4 pages aloud. For me, my metaphor is like it's a thing I'm weaving. So wherever I stop, I kind of go back and feel where the weave is and then get it going again. Even though that's not going to be the final draft.
Do you ever have someone else read it? Just to...
I do when I feel like only when I feel like I've done everything I can do, or I'm really confused. I don't need somebody to tell me it's not done when I know it's not done. So, and to be patient enough to spend a lot of time getting it where you want it to be. But some people also benefit from quick dialogue, quick response, right? But you should ask yourself, what are you expecting them to say to you? Are you expecting them to confirm your worst fears? Well, then maybe you ought to really make a list of your worst fears about it and then see if those are really justified, right? Because if you already know that, then you probably don't need to. You probably should save them, that person, for a more important moment. They're a resource for you, right? They're patients. Other things? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you said William Gass is like a great stylist that we should read everything he said.
Well, yeah, maybe, but a lot.
Yeah. Other great stylists you would recommend us reading, particularly for the sentence level?
Well, all of those folks are good, and those are just some I picked out. I mean, I would recommend, I don't know how many of you keep commonplace books. Anybody? You copy out passages that you like from books? There you go. I recommend you do that. And do it by hand. When you find something that just kills you, write it down. Take the time to go slow and go inside those words. Because when you're reading them, you're in the role of the reader. When you're copying them out, you're closer to being in the role of the writer, which is the person who is, we read those paragraphs about the chalice, armpits like chalices. How many days did that take? Maybe it just took a morning, but maybe not, right? So you get closer to the actual mechanics again. Of course, I always encourage the poets to do that. Copy out those poems, slow down, and get into the materiality of the poems. If you're going to read Gass is a wonderful nonfiction book is called On Being Blue. And if you know Maggie Nelson's book, Bluets, it owes everything to On Being Blue. She acknowledges it in the book. And it's a novella-length book. It's about writing. His criticism, his essays, he's written 3 or 4 collections of essays, and each of them is a work of art. He's profoundly learned, but also a super stylist. And so if he's writing about Emerson and talking about the great meadows of Emerson's style, well, you'll go with him. So he's one of those people I think about when I'm trying to encourage the third term folks to think of their essay as not just a paper that they have to get done, but potentially a work of art that will have all that mouth as well as all that head. You look like you have something. Do you have something? No? Okay. Other stylists, John Berger, who should have won the Nobel Prize, but they wouldn't give it to a Marxist, is a fantastic stylist. Nobody writes about art and nobody writes about drawing and painting better than John Berger. He was a good novelist too, great essayist. He writes wonder books. Is a good one. I don't know. Let's see. Who else? Who else? Well, somebody mentioned, good old Middlemarch, right? She's a good stylist. Those paragraphs are pretty fantastical. Each of them is almost like a universe, right? Read Henry James, who's like really boring, but also a great writer. I mean, a paragraph of Henry James is like 4 universes, He will teach you about, sometimes you read writers too just so they can teach you how to be. I mean, James can teach you how to see stuff. He can call your attention to things that you never thought about seeing. And then you can start to see them and find your own words for them. Yeah?
Nabokov.
Yes, yeah, sure. Sure, absolutely. He's a great writer. And an interesting, a genius in a language, not his first language, too. Just like Joseph Conrad.
I guess the challenge is to apply that engineering to your own style, to your own voice, without mimicking some of those greats that you've read. It's hard to do. Suddenly you start to sound like Cormac McCarthy, and you go, yeah, that's Cormac McCarthy, or that's what sounds like you in your work within your little world.
If you start to sound like somebody, you have clearly internalized, if you've got good models, you've clearly internalized, you're clearly close to something that you can then reject and can actually know that you're rejecting it, which is at least gives you some kind of purchase on finding your own path. We're all in some way beholden to some writers, right? Or we're beholden to a prevailing style in our time. If you're a fiction writer and you're writing short sentences like Michael's, they're going to say, yeah, that's that Hemingway hard-boiled style. And it's true. I mean, he was a short story writer and he wrote in that short. By the way, that's a fantastic book, Shuffle by Leonard Michaels. It's a wonder book. It moves. Some of it's nonfiction, some of it's fiction. It rolls around. It's a shuffle. He tells that story of his wife's death twice, 2 different modes. It's very interesting. Other things? You're going to let me off. I'm really glad. No, I'm not really glad. Anyway, thank you. You've been very attentive. I'll give you this.